The morning is quiet in a way that feels almost too still, the soft hum of the street beyond your backyard blending with the faint rustle of leaves in the early light. A pair of cardinals perch on the edge of the feeder, their red feathers glowing warmly against the pale yellow of dawn. You step onto the deck, coffee in hand, and the usual clatter of seeds spilling into the tray fills the air, but something feels slightly off. The chickadees that normally flit from branch to branch are unusually subdued, their tiny bodies barely moving as they cling to the twigs. The sunlight filters through the maple, throwing long shadows across the grass, and the wind carries a whisper of chill that makes the air feel heavier than usual. You notice a finch pausing mid-hop, staring intently at the feeder as if measuring something invisible. There's a subtle hush, a weight in the quiet that wasn't there yesterday, a pause in the rhythm of the yard that causes your chest to tighten ever so slightly. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to see will change the way you look at every bird that visits your yard. The blue jay perched near the fence tilts its head in a curious, deliberate way, almost calculating, almost waiting, and your eyes follow the precise twitch of its feathers. The light seems to hold in place for a fraction longer than natural, the shadows stretching with a slowness that unsettles even as it captivates. A nuthatch creeps along the trunk of the birch, pausing under the eaves, wings quivering softly, as though it's aware of something you're not yet seeing. And here is where the ordinary begins to bend. Your feeder looks the same, the seeds scattered as usual, yet a subtle tension hovers over every perch, every movement, as if the yard itself is holding its breath. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant creak of the fence, the faint flutter of feathers in the corners of your vision, all of it conspires to make you notice the space between things, the silence between calls. The air feels thick with a presence just at the edge of perception. And then you catch it, a small, deliberate pause from every bird. A suspended moment that feels orchestrated, synchronized in a way you cannot rationally name. But that's only the first layer. And this is when everything starts to shift. Something about the patterns of their gaze, the measured pauses in their hopping and calling, hints that the ordinary has begun to unravel. You lean slightly forward, noticing the glint of the feeder's metal edge, the minute tilt of the cardinal's head, the way a single wing catches the light differently than a second ago, and you realize that what you're seeing is not merely a morning ritual. It is the subtle signal of something deeper unfolding. And just as you begin to grasp the quiet strangeness, the soft thrum of your own heartbeat seems to merge with the hush of the yard, the world tilting just a fraction, enough to make the familiar feel unfamiliar. The question that forms unspoken on your lips is simple yet urgent. What is really happening out here, before your very eyes, that you haven't noticed until now? But that's just the beginning. You take a slow step back onto the deck, the warmth of the coffee in your hand grounding you. Yet there is a tension that you cannot quite place. Perhaps it is the way the sunlight now slants differently across the grass, catching the dewdrops on the leaves in an unfamiliar sparkle, or the way the wind carries the faintest tremor through the branches overhead. You remember mornings like this, when the yard seemed ordinary, filled with birds flitting and calling, and yet today there is a subtle pause that feels intimate, as if the birds themselves are acknowledging your presence with quiet awareness. A chickadee hops cautiously from branch to branch, and you feel an unspoken connection, remembering other times when your movements went unnoticed, and suddenly now, everything seems more attentive, more alive to your rhythm. The cardinal shifts slightly, tilting its head with that familiar, deliberate curiosity, and you know that the feeling you are sensing is mutual, a mirrored acknowledgement of observation and care that you have felt in other quiet corners of your life. Perhaps you have felt it before when stepping into a sunlit room and noticing a small detail that everyone else overlooks, or when pausing in a familiar place and feeling a subtle weight, a presence, or a rhythm that others miss. It is that same gentle recognition that now seems to fill the yard, wrapping around the feeder, the trees, the soft dusting of light on the lawn, and settling in your chest with a quiet hum. If you are new here, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because the subtle, almost imperceptible messages unfolding in the space you share with the birds will change the way you notice the world outside your window, and the tiny, deliberate gestures of life around you will never appear the same again. And as you sip your coffee, your eyes tracing the meticulous patterns of wings and perches, you realize that what seemed ordinary before carries a weight of understanding, a reflection of your own presence. And it is this awareness that begins to deepen, pulling you into the next moment where every small motion and glance will matter more than it has ever before. As you lean closer to the railing, the subtle movements of the birds begin to tell a story that is not immediately obvious. The chickadee that had been hesitating on the edge of the maple now tilts its head at a slight angle, observing not just the feeder, but the space around it, the shadow cast by a nearby bush, the way the sunlight flickers across the lawn. You notice the cardinal shifting its weight between talons, a small, deliberate adjustment that seems almost purposeful, a rhythm that aligns with something unseen. The nuthatch moves along the trunk in precise increments, pausing to peer out from behind the bark, as if mapping more than just the physical structure of the yard. A goldfinch hovers briefly near the feeder, wings beating in silent pulses, scanning the seed and the surrounding shrubs in a pattern that repeats, almost imperceptibly, with each pass. The finches that normally scatter when you move instead hold their positions, their eyes following your motion with an attentiveness that feels intentional, measured. There is a subtle layering of observation and response here, a hidden dialogue written in feathers and light, one that most people would never notice because it unfolds quietly, between breaths and wing beats. You become aware that this is a space where the ordinary rules of movement and attention bend slightly, revealing a careful choreography that has been happening unnoticed, day after day, unnoticed until now. The way the morning light pools in the hollows of the trees, the way the wind shifts the leaves in a soft, constant rhythm, the deliberate pauses and small gestures of the birds, all of it hints at a world beneath the familiar, a layer just beyond perception that seems to respond to presence and intention. And as you trace these patterns, a quiet thought forms, almost like a whisper. There is more here than meets the eye, a subtle order, a hidden structure that quietly shapes the life of the yard, waiting for someone to notice and step into it. You notice a subtle shift in the air as the cardinal flutters closer to the edge of the feeder, its posture precise, as if guided by an unseen rhythm. Researchers at Cornell and the University of Washington have observed patterns like this in backyard birds, noting how their attention and movement can align with repeated human behavior, and it suddenly feels plausible, almost undeniable, as you watch it unfold before you. The chickadee pauses, tilting its head in a way that seems deliberate, scanning not only the seeds but the surrounding branches and shadows, echoing what studies describe as anticipatory behavior. The sunlight glints off the feeder in narrow slivers, highlighting a finch lingering longer than expected, every tiny flutter and hop mapping onto a pattern that scientists have documented, a rhythm of vigilance and recognition that most people never perceive. You notice the nuthatch tracing the bark of the birch in slow, measured steps, each one deliberate, and you realize that the birds are reading more than the surface. They are responding to repeated cues, your presence, your habits, and the subtle layout of the yard. It feels scientifically grounded, yet still intimate. The knowledge that birds can memorize feeding schedules and recognize familiar humans transforms the scene from mere observation into a layered reality. The faint hum of the wind, the slight rustle of the maple leaves, the glimmer of light on a single feather, all of it converges to suggest that these moments, though ordinary at first glance, are quietly orchestrated by instinct and memory. The yard feels alive with invisible connections, the birds attuned to a pattern you are only beginning to notice, and it lingers in your chest, a quiet, growing wonder that perhaps, just perhaps, the world around you holds a depth you have not yet seen, waiting for your awareness to catch up. You bend slightly toward the feeder, noticing the cardinal lifting a seed in its beak, pausing just long enough for you to catch the soft glint in its eye. It is not hurried, not startled, simply deliberate, and in that moment, it feels as if the bird is aware of you in a way that goes beyond observation. A chickadee lands lightly on the branch closest to where you are standing, wings folding neatly against its sides, its tiny talons gripping the wood with a precision that seems intimate, personal. You notice the delicate twitch of its head as it assesses your presence, a repeated gesture that suggests familiarity, a quiet recognition that grows heavier in meaning each time it occurs. The finches hopping along the edge of the feeder pause in almost synchrony, their subtle movements echoing patterns that have emerged over days, weeks, a rhythm that quietly acknowledges your presence without words, without sound, yet profoundly felt. A nuthatch slides down the trunk of the birch with methodical care, stopping to glance in your direction, feathers catching the morning light, and a sense of connection forms, the kind that creeps slowly into awareness, attaching itself to the moment. Even the air feels charged with shared attention. The wind rustles through the leaves as if echoing the small, deliberate actions of the birds, and you sense that you are part of this space, woven into the morning ritual in ways that have never been obvious before. Each tiny movement, each measured pause, each glance carries an intimacy that is easy to overlook but impossible to deny once noticed. You feel the slow, quiet pull of attachment, the unfolding awareness that your presence, your care, your routine have become meaningful in the rhythm of the yard, and in the stillness between each flutter and hop, you sense that a subtle bond is forming, one that asks only that you continue to observe, continue to be present, to become part of this quiet, living pattern. The wind shifts slightly, carrying a faint scent of wet earth and pine, and you notice the cardinal adjusting its perch as though aware of a deeper rhythm in the yard, a subtle pulse that extends beyond the feeder or the branches you can see. The chickadees, once tentative, begin moving in a pattern that seems almost ritualistic, small groups hopping in measured succession, their calls soft, deliberate, and layered with intention you have not noticed before. The finches linger longer at the edge of the bird bath, heads cocked in precise angles, as if consulting some internal map of the yard, and the nuthatch pauses mid-ascent along the birch trunk, its tiny claws gripping with unusual firmness, each movement measured, intentional, significant in a way that humbles the eye that watches. Light slants differently now through the leaves, catching tiny movements of wings and feather edges, highlighting rhythms that feel larger than the morning itself, suggesting that every action, every pause, every glance is part of a subtle order you are only beginning to perceive. There is a quiet escalation in the way the birds occupy the space, a heightened awareness, a layering of observation that makes the yard feel simultaneously intimate and vast, as though the ordinary boundaries of your perception are stretching. The soft rustle of leaves, the faint clink of seed against metal, the precise fluttering of wings in the filtered sunlight combine into a delicate symphony, signaling that something in the yard has shifted and is larger than any single bird, any single morning. You sense that there is more unfolding, a hidden pattern of behavior and attention that continues to expand beyond your immediate vision, waiting for you to notice the next subtle clue, and you find yourself leaning in, compelled to follow, because what happens next will reveal just how far this quiet, intricate world extends. As the morning deepens, the yard feels suspended in a quiet resonance, the birds' movements deliberate yet intangible in their meaning. The cardinal shifts slightly on the feeder, tilting its head with a meticulous awareness that seems almost conversational, a gesture that many people believe carries a subtle message beyond instinct alone. The chickadees continue their measured hops, the pattern of their tiny steps and the timing of their calls forming a rhythm that feels significant, yet resists full explanation, as if the space between each flutter holds more than what the eye can see. The nuthatch pauses, claws gripping the birch bark with a precision that seems reflective, and you feel an inexplicable weight in the morning air, a sense that these ordinary creatures are participating in a quiet dialogue, layered and attentive, that exists just beyond logical understanding. Something about this feels difficult to ignore. The repeated gestures, the tiny variations in posture, the way a finch hovers for just a fraction longer at the edge of the feeder, all imply a depth to the morning that is almost imperceptible, yet deeply present. You notice the interplay of shadow and light, the shimmer of feathers in the sun, the faint rustle of leaves, and the world seems to hold its breath in recognition of these subtle signals. It is contemplative, reflective, as if the yard itself is aware of your presence, and you are becoming attuned to a rhythm that many overlook, a quiet unfolding that hints at a larger connection, one that asks only for your attention and observation. And as you watch, a soft, unspoken understanding begins to take shape, a whisper of meaning that stretches beyond the ordinary patterns of life, inviting you to follow and notice what lies just beneath the surface. The yard feels suspended, each sound muted in comparison to the quiet pulse of movement and light that surrounds you. The cardinal perches without motion, its head slowly tilting as if considering the space itself, the shadow beneath the maple spreading across the grass in elongated fingers that almost reach toward the feeder. The chickadees settle in small clusters, their soft calls rare and deliberate, carrying through the morning like whispered punctuation in the rhythm of the day. Sunlight glimmers on the edges of feathers, catching the tiniest details, the curve of a wing, the tilt of an eye, the flicker of a tail, as though the light itself is pausing to take measure. A gentle wind brushes through the leaves, stirring them with quiet insistence, the sound almost a companion to the subtle motions of the birds, a soft symphony of stillness. You notice the nuthatch frozen mid-climb, claws grasping bark, and the finches hovering in delicate arcs above the seed, their wings holding for a fraction longer than necessary, each act imbued with an unspoken significance that is neither urgent nor demanding. The space between your own breaths and the flutter of wings seems to expand, leaving room for reflection, for the subtle hum of presence that fills the yard. It is a pause that stretches, a moment that asks nothing more than attention, yet gives back a weight of quiet understanding, a deep recognition of the rhythms that have unfolded and the patterns that now feel intimate. In this stillness, the morning seems larger than itself, and you are left absorbing the fullness of the space, the careful choreography of life around you, the gentle resonance of observation and being, lingering quietly in the chest and mind, settling with a calm that asks only that you notice and feel. The yard has settled into a hush that feels almost sacred, each bird holding its place with quiet deliberation, the morning light stretching gently across the grass, highlighting the soft textures of leaves and the shimmer of feathers in ways that make every detail feel intimately observed. The cardinal tilts its head slowly, eyes catching yours in a fleeting moment of mutual recognition, and it seems as though the world has narrowed to this space, this subtle exchange of attention and awareness. The chickadees move carefully among the branches, their tiny bodies deliberate, measured, each hop and glance layered with intention, and you feel the weight of presence that cannot be named, a connection that is felt rather than explained. The nuthatch pauses, claws clutching the birch bark as though rooted in both the earth and this invisible current that courses quietly through the yard, while the finches hover in delicate arcs, wings beating softly, suspended in time that feels stretched just enough for you to notice every nuance. And in this stillness, a reflective realization settles. The ordinary has revealed its hidden depth, the small, careful gestures of life around you carrying significance that resonates with your own rhythm. And something about the pattern of observation and attention feels almost like a quiet conversation across species, a subtle dialogue of existence that leaves you with a sense of wonder and gentle awe. Thank you for staying until the end of this morning, for moving with the rhythm of the yard, and sharing in this quiet awareness. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because there is still so much beyond these branches that most of us rarely see. And maybe, somewhere out there tonight, a small feathered shape is watching, pausing, noticing, and the world you have stepped into continues quietly, patiently, in ways that are impossible to capture fully but impossible to forget.